Imagine a town where time seems to stand still. This is Pinebrook, Oregon in 1974, a place where everybody knows your name, and the biggest news is the high school football score. It's the kind of town you think you know inside and out, until one day, it shows you a secret it's been hiding. Our story begins here, on a cool September evening, with a man named Harold Whitaker. Harold was the very definition of predictable. At 38, he was a history teacher, a man of routine and quiet dignity. He lived alone, mowed his lawn every Saturday, and was never ever late for work. His students knew him as strict but fair, always with a stack of books and a worn leather notebook. This notebook was more than just paper and binding. It was an extension of Harold himself, a constant companion holding his thoughts and observations. On the evening of September 14th, a Saturday, Harold stuck to his routine. Went to Mel's diner for his usual black coffee and a slice of apple pie. But that night, something was different. Clara, the waitress, would later recall how he sat in his corner booth, but his mind seemed to whirl away. He wasn't eating. He was writing frantically in that leather notebook, kept looking out the window, his gaze distant, his fingers tapping anxiously. Other regulars noticed it too. The dependable Harold Whitaker seemed agitated. Was he nervous? Lost in thoughts? No one could say for sure, but it was clear this wasn't the Harold they knew. At exactly 9:07 p.m., he paid his bill, left a generous tip, and walked out into the night. The air was crisp, smelling of pine trees and gasoline. Lara watched him get into his green 1969 Ford Galaxy. He paused for a moment, looking up at the dark sky as if expecting a signal, then started the engine and drove off into the darkness. That was the last time anyone in Pinebrook would ever see him. The next morning, the bell rang at Pinebrook High, but Harold Whitaker's classroom was empty. This was unheard of. By noon, the alarm was raised. The sheriff was called. Deputies found his house on Willow Lane, locked and tidy. Everything was in its place, the dishes washed, the laundry folded, his wallet and watch resting on the dresser. But one crucial item was missing, his leather notebook. The one he'd been writing in so intently at the diner. It was gone. As the sun began to set, Sheriff Tom Rourke knew this was serious. He organized a search party. The townspeople of Pinebrook, worried for one of their own, fanned out with flashlights and dogs, combing the forest roads north of town. The air grew cold, and the woods felt vast and unnervously quiet. Just before midnight, a breakthrough. Deputy Frank Miller caught the faint glint of headlights deep within the trees. They followed the light, and there it was, Harold's Ford Galaxy. It was parked on a remote logging road, miles from the main highway, angled as if it had been stopped in a hurry. The scene was bizarrely serene. The driver's door was unlocked, and the keys were still hanging in the ignition. The car seemed to be waiting for its owner to return. And then they saw it. On the passenger seat, a discovery that only deepened the mystery. Harold's horn-rimmed glasses were there, folded neatly, and beneath them lay the leather notebook. The very notebook that had been missing from his house was placed right there, almost as if it were a message. Next to it was a folded map of the surrounding wilderness, covered in Harold's distinct handwriting. He had circled remote trails and made cryptic notes. But of Harold himself, there was no sign. No footprints in the soft dirt. No signs of a struggle. Nothing to suggest what had happened. It was as if he had simply stepped out of his car and evaporated into the dense Oregon forest. Sheriff Rourke and his men searched through the night. They called his name until their voices were hoarse, but the only answer was the echo from the trees. Search dogs picked up a scent near the car, but it vanished within a few feet, leaving them confused and whining. By sunrise, the exhausted search party had to admit defeat. They had found nothing. All that remained was the silent Ford Galaxy, a lonely monument to an impossible disappearance. And so, the mystery of Harold Whitaker was born. A man of routine, a man of history, suddenly became a ghost story, whispered in the halls of the school where he taught. What happened to him on that logging road? What secrets were hidden in the pages of his notebook and the markings on his map? Was he running from something? Or towards something? Yes. For decades, these questions have lingered in the quiet town of Pinebrook. A haunting reminder that sometimes the most ordinary people leave behind the most extraordinary mysteries. The case of Harold Whitaker remains unsolved, a chilling local legend of the teacher who walked into the woods and never came back. What do you think happened to Harold Whitaker? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more unsolved mysteries. Thanks for watching. The morning after Harold's abandoned car was found, the small town of Pinebrook woke up in a state of shock. News travels fast in a place like this, and by the time Sunday breakfast was being served, every table at Mel's Diner was buzzing with whispers. Did you hear? They found Harold's car out in the woods. They say the keys were still in it. No. Listen to this. His glasses were inside. You know, Harold couldn't see a thing without those. For a town as small and predictable as Pinebrook, a disappearance of this magnitude was just unthinkable. Sheriff Rourke didn't waste a second. He called in every deputy he had, even bringing in volunteers from neighboring counties. By noon, a crowd of over 50 people had gathered at the edge of the forest, ready to start the search. Now, these Oregon woods are no joke. They stretch for miles and miles, towering pines, dense undergrowth, and streams that cut deep through the valleys. It's a place where sound plays tricks on you, where shadows feel deeper even in broad daylight. The locals knew the terrain, but they also knew its dangers. Steep cliffs, wild animals, and a kind of unsettling silence that could disorient even the most experienced hiker. Deputy Frank Miller was in charge of coordinating the search teams. You could hear the radios crackling as different groups fanned out in grids, marking trees with bright orange tape so they wouldn't get lost. Some brought search dogs, others carried lanterns, preparing for the long haul. Every time they called out Harold's name, it was like the forest just swallowed the sound whole, echoing back with this hollow emptiness that sent a shiver down your spine. Then, at 2:17 in the afternoon, a breakthrough, or so they thought. One group reported finding footprints, large men's boots, leading away from the dirt road where Harold's Ford Galaxy had been discovered. The prints stretched for nearly half a mile into the dense forest before stopping. Just abruptly stopping on a patch of hard, flat stone. Beyond that, there was nothing. No drag marks, no broken branches, nothing at all to suggest where Harold might have gone. Back at the car, Sheriff Rourke went over Harold's belongings again and again. The notebook was what really troubled him. Page after page was filled with Harold's neat, precise handwriting, lecture notes, historical timelines, sketches of old maps. But the final entries were different. They stood out. September 10th, something unusual near Black Hollow. Lights where there shouldn't be any. September 12th, dreams repeating, same sound, same image. Why always the woods? And then the one that made the sheriff's blood run cold. Dated September 14th. If I don't return, look near the ridge. If I don't return, why would Harold, a rational, level-headed history teacher, write something so cryptic, so final? What did he mean by that? Immediately, the search effort shifted. The focus was now on the ridge Harold had mentioned in his notebook. A group of young men, some of Harold's former students, volunteered to climb the steep, treacherous path. They came back hours later, their faces pale and visibly shaken. At the top of the ridge, they had found something truly strange. It was a circle of charred earth, about 12 feet wide, surrounded by scorched tree branches. The ground had this faint metallic smell like burnt wiring. This was no ordinary campfire. No campfire could have burned that hot without leaving some kind of debris behind. But this circle was clean, precise, almost unnatural. When word of this discovery reached the town, the rumor mill went into overdrive. Some people whispered about cult activity in the forest. Others were convinced it was secret military experiments, after all. This was the height of the Cold War, and suspicion was everywhere. But a few of the older residents muttered something different, lowering their voices so the children couldn't hear. It's not the first time someone has gone missing out there. And they were right. Sheriff Rourke knew it. He remembered two other cases, both unsolved, both chillingly similar. In 1961, a hunter named Walter Briggs vanished near Black Hollow. They only ever found his rifle. Then, in 1967, a young couple hiking along that same ridge disappeared without a trace. Their tent was discovered, but there were no footprints leading away from it. It was as if they had just vanished into thin air. And now, Harold Whitaker had joined that list of the lost. As dusk began to settle, the search was officially called off for the night. The volunteers, exhausted and disheartened, gathered at the sheriff's office. Their faces were lined with a mixture of fear and confusion. Outside, the forest loomed in the distance, dark and silent, as if it were holding its secrets tightly to its chest. Sheriff Rourke stood before the crowd. "We'll go back out tomorrow," he said, his voice firm. "Wider sweep. No one goes alone. Until we find Harold, no one goes into those woods at night." "Do I make myself clear?" The room murmured in agreement, but you could feel the unease hanging in the air. That night, Pinebrook barely slept. Windows were locked, curtains were drawn tight, radios hummed low with late-night news, a small comfort against the sprawling darkness. Somewhere beyond the town's borders, the forest stretched endlessly under the cold moonlight, waiting. And Harold Whitaker was still out there, or something else was. What do you think happened to Harold? Was it something human, or did he stumble upon something else? Let me know your theories down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you're intrigued by mysteries like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss what happens next. Stay safe out there. The calm of Pinebrook shattered by the third day, Harold Whitaker was gone. The streets, once so quiet you could hear the river a mile off, were now a frantic mess of reporters, search teams, and nervous neighbors. The town's one gas station had never seen so many out-of-town plates. Inside Mel's Diner, Harold's usual Thursday spot, the talk wasn't about crops or lumber prices anymore. Every booth was a cauldron of theories. He left his glasses in the car. One man murmured he couldn't even see the menu without M. A woman shot back, maybe he planned it. Just packed up and slipped away into the night, but a logger at the counter slammed his mug down, his voice cutting through the chatter. "No, folks don't just vanish in Pinebrook. The woods take them, same as before." That phrase, "same as before," hung in the air like a thick fog. Rumors started to crawl out of the woodwork. Stories of other disappearances, decades old, that were never printed in any paper. Hunters who went into the woods and never came out. A boy in the 50s who vanished walking home from school. In Pinebrook, memories are long, and they're often darker than history books. Sheriff Rourke did his best to keep a lid on the growing panic. He assured everyone the state police were searching, that they needed more volunteers. But he couldn't shake what his own deputy, Frank Miller, had told him. Frank reported a strange low vibration near Black Hollow Ridge. It was so faint you could easily dismiss it, but it made the air feel heavy, almost like the sound itself was bending the trees. "Keep that out of the official report," Rourke had ordered, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying a deep unease. The clues left behind only deepened the mystery. Harold's jacket was found folded neatly on the passenger seat of his car, as if he expected to be back in a moment. But his notebook was something else. The last few pages weren't the neat lesson plans of a history teacher. They were filled with frantic scribbles of circles, strange constellations, and cryptic notes. One line sent a chill down everyone's spine. "If I hear it again, I'll follow. Proof is the only way they'll ever believe me." What did he hear? What did he need to prove? That evening, the whole town gathered in the old school gymnasium. The bleachers groaned under the weight of nearly every family in Pinebrook. The air was thick with fear. Children sat wide-eyed, their parents' hands gripping theirs a little too tightly. At first it was chaos. Voices rose in anger. Parents demanded curfews. Shopkeepers wanted nightly patrols. Some men even accused the sheriff of hiding something, of not telling the whole story. Then, a single voice cut through the noise. It was Margaret Kane, a frail woman in her late 70s, a Pinebrook native through and through. Her voice trembled, but it carried a chilling authority. "This isn't new," she said. "When I was a girl, my uncle vanished near Black Hollow. Before him, others went too. My grandmother always said the forest remembers, that sometimes it chooses someone." A profound silence fell over the gym. No one dared to laugh. The old folklore suddenly didn't seem so foolish. As people left, porch lights flickered on all across town. They spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid the woods themselves were listening. And that night it wasn't just the wind they heard. Several families reported a strange, low, steady tone, not machinery, not an animal's howl, but something else entirely. By dawn, the situation had escalated. 2 FBI agents, their faces impassive, stepped out of a black sedan. Their arrival was both a relief and a terrifying confirmation. If the feds were here, Harold's disappearance was far from ordinary. Pinebrook was changing. This was no longer a place where you left your doors unlocked. Now bolts were triple-checked, and rifles were kept close by. And still, Harold Whitaker was gone. Not a single footprint, not a scrap of clothing. Just a void filled with questions and a creeping, dreadful feeling that the town of Pinebrook itself was holding on to a terrible secret. What really happened to Harold? And what is the sound that echoes from Black Hollow Ridge? The truth, it seems, is buried deep in the heart of these ancient woods. Thanks for joining me on this dive into the unsettling mystery of Pinebrook. If you enjoy stories that blur the line between reality and the unknown, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. What do you think happened to Harold? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Stay safe, and see you in the next one. The morning after Margaret Kane's chilling words, Pinebrook awoke under a gray, heavy sky. The logging town was unusually silent, as if every sound had been swallowed up by the looming pines. Normally at this hour, sawmills would be rattling and trucks rolling along Main Street. But on this day, people lingered indoors, their blinds half drawn, their eyes fixed on the road, waiting. Just after 9 a.m., their wait was over. A black sedan rolled into town, its polished exterior a stark contrast to the mud-streaked pickup trucks parked along the street. It crunched over the gravel and stopped. 2 men stepped out, both in dark suits that seemed far too formal for a place like Pinebrook. They didn't smile. The older one introduced himself as Agent Thomas Carver. His voice low and clipped, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. The younger one, Agent Daniel Hayes, had sharper features and a cautious gaze that scanned everything, the cracked storefronts, the townsfolk watching nervously, even the ridge beyond the houses. Sheriff Rourke greeted them stiffly outside his office. "Didn't think the Bureau would take interest in a missing teacher?" he muttered, his own authority feeling suddenly diminished. Carver replied without hesitation, his words cutting through the morning quiet. "This isn't just a missing person, Sheriff. Not with what you found." That sentence spread faster than wildfire. By noon, everyone in Pinebrook knew the FBI was officially involved. For some, it brought a sliver of hope, a sense of safety. For others, it was a confirmation of their deepest fears, a sign that something was truly horribly wrong. Psst. Inside the cramped sheriff's office, the agent spread Harold's belongings across the desk. His neatly folded jacket, his keys, his wallet, and the item that held all the secrets, his notebook. They examined the sketches, their fingers tracing the strange circles and constellations that filled the pages. Orion, Cassiopeia. Lyra Hayes muttered, his voice a low hum of recognition. But why draw them this way? These alignments, they don't make sense for this region. Unless he stopped, but his silence hung heavily in the room, thick with unspoken possibilities. Carver's eyes lingered on a final, scribbled page, the words almost illegible. If the sound comes again, follow it. Proof must be seen, not told. Carver shut the notebook abruptly, as if the words themselves unsettled him, a rare crack in his professional facade. Later that afternoon, the agents asked to visit Harold's abandoned car. It still sat parked on the edge of the dirt road, a silent monument to his disappearance, dew clinging to its hood. Hayes knelt beside the vehicle, his trained eyes studying the ground. "No prints leading away," he whispered, more to himself than to the sheriff. "Not even a scuff mark." Rourke frowned, a knot of frustration tightening in his gut. "We combed this place for days. The dogs couldn't even pick up a trail." Hayes looked up, his gaze locking with the sheriff's. "That's because there isn't one. He didn't walk away from here." Those words sent a shiver down Rourke's spine, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the damp air. Meanwhile, the very fabric of Pinebrook was unraveling. Families who had lived there for generations now spoke in whispers about moving away. Children, once free to roam the woods, were now forbidden to leave their yards. The diner, usually quiet in the evenings, stayed open late, packed with worried residents seeking the comfort of numbers. Their conversations a low buzz of anxiety, and with the fear the old stories resurfaced. Stories that had been dismissed as local folklore were now being retold with a new, terrifying urgency. Old men recalled strange lights drifting silently above the ridge back in the 1940s. Hunters spoke of a deep, humming vibration they'd felt in the forest, like massive gears grinding beneath the earth. One woman swore she'd seen shadows moving between the trees, tall and unnatural, though no one else had seen them. That evening, Carver and Hayes requested a meeting with the town council. They stood at the front of the old gymnasium, the very same place where Margaret Kane had delivered her prophecy. The air was thick with expectation, with a desperate need for answers. Carver, ever the pragmatist, spoke bluntly. "We cannot rule out foul play, but what concerns us is the consistency of historical reports from this area. Lights, sounds, disappearances. Mr. Whitaker may not be the first. If that is the case, then your town has a much larger problem than one missing man." Gasps rippled through the room. The sheriff bristled, his local pride wounded. "You're suggesting what? Something unnatural?" Hayes didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled out a map Harold had drawn in his notebook. It was a chaotic web of circles, arrows, and lines connecting stars to specific points in the surrounding forest. Hayes tapped his finger on a marked area, a place notorious in local lore, labeled Black Hollow Ridge. "We start here tomorrow," he said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. The room erupted in whispers. Mothers clutched their children's hands tighter. Men exchanged worried sidelong glances. And in the very back row, almost hidden in the shadows, Margaret Kane bowed her head, whispering to no one in particular. Her voice a ghostly echo. "It's calling them too. Outside." As the meeting dispersed and people hurried back to the fragile safety of their homes, the wind rattled the trees with an eerie persistence. And through the sound of the wind, some swore they heard it again, that low, steady hum, threading its way through the night air. The FBI agents would search Black Hollow Ridge in the morning, but as the darkness deepened over Pinebrook, many wondered if they were searching for Harold Whitaker, or if the forest had already claimed him forever. Thanks for watching this chapter of our story. If you're as captivated by the mystery of Pinebrook as we are, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. We'll see you in the next video. The next morning, Pinebrook was still wrapped in a thick, silent mist as Agent Carver and Agent Hayes set out. Sheriff Rourke and two of his deputies joined them, their faces grim. Their destination was Black Hollow Ridge, the mysterious location Harold Whitaker's notebook had circled over and over again, an obsession etched in ink. The forest swallowed them almost immediately. The deeper they ventured, the quieter it became. It was an unnatural silence, so profound that the simple crunch of their boots on the forest floor felt like a violation. There were no birds singing, no squirrels chattering in the branches. It felt as though the entire woodland was holding its breath, watching them. Agent Carver took the lead, his hand resting near the revolver at his side, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow, every movement in the undergrowth. Hayes walked a few paces behind, clutching Harold's notebook as if it were a sacred text, a compass to guide them through this unsettling labyrinth. Damn. Every time the path forked, Hayes would pause, poring over the pages, comparing the twisted shapes of the trees and the gentle slopes of the land with Harold's frantic sketches. This way, he'd say, his voice a low murmur, laced with an unease he couldn't quite conceal. By midday, they reached a small clearing at the base of the ridge. Sheriff Rourke, a man who knew these woods, stopped dead in his tracks. "This is it," he muttered, his gaze sweeping over his two deputies. "This is where the hunters said they heard it." Hayes tilted his head, listening intently. For a long moment there was only that oppressive silence, and then he felt it. Faint, almost imperceptible, a low vibration humming up through the soles of his boots, a metallic thrum that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. It lasted only a second, but it was enough to make the hairs on everyone's neck stand on end. "Did you feel that?" Hayes whispered, his eyes wide. Carver's jaw tightened into a hard line. "Keep moving." The climb up Black Hollow Ridge was grueling. The forest seemed to actively resist their presence. Fallen trees blocked their path, slick moss sent them sliding, and jagged stones threatened to trip them at every step. The deputies cursed under their breath, their initial confidence evaporating, but none of them dared to suggest turning back. With each step, the air felt heavier, as if they were pushing against an invisible weight. Halfway up the ridge, they found something that froze them in place. A shoe. It was ancient, waterlogged, and half buried under a thick blanket of pine needles. Rourke picked it up with a gentle hand. "This isn't Harold's," he said, his voice heavy as he shook his head. This is decades old." Hayes took the shoe, examining it closely. The leather was cracked and worn, but remarkably intact. And there, burned into the worn sole, was a faint set of initials. CK. The name meant nothing to them, but Margaret Kane's chilling words echoed in Sheriff Rourke's mind. Asterisk, this ISNT, the first time the forest has taken someone. Asterisk, they pressed on, a new sense of dread settling over the group. As the ridge grew steeper, the mist thickened around them, coiling through the trees like ghostly smoke. The deputies began to mutter about turning back, their nerve finally breaking, but a single, hard glare from Carver silenced them. Then Hayes stopped abruptly, his body dropping into a low crouch. He brushed away a patch of damp leaves, revealing a small circle of stones. The edges of the stones were blackened, as if they had been scorched by an intense fire. "A campfire?" one of the deputies asked, his voice trembling slightly. Hayes shook his head slowly. "There's no wood, no ash, just burn marks." And then they all saw it etched faintly into one of the blackened stones was a carved spiral, an exact match to the strange symbols that filled Harold Whitaker's notebook. "Whitaker was here," Hayes murmured, his voice a mix of discovery and fear. The air grew colder the higher they climbed, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the altitude. By late afternoon, they finally reached a plateau. The dense trees opened up, revealing a breathtaking view of the valley below. For a fleeting moment, the scene was beautiful, the golden glow of the setting sun catching the distant rooftops of Pinebrook. But that beauty was swallowed almost instantly by a profound and overwhelming dread. Because there, in the very center of the plateau, stood something utterly unnatural. A circle of stones, each one taller than a man, arranged in a deliberate, perfect pattern. A pattern that mirrored the strange constellations Harold had so obsessively drawn. The ground inside the stone circle was scorched completely black. The deputies froze, their faces pale with shock. What in the hell is this?" one of them whispered, his voice cracking. Carver's face darkened, his professional composure finally beginning to fray. "It's something Harold found," he said grimly. "And something someone didn't want him to talk about." Rourke stepped forward, kneeling to touch the scorched earth inside the circle. It was warm, not from the sun. It was warmer than that. A deep, pulsing heat that seemed to radiate from far beneath the ground. He snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. And then the sound returned, the hum. But this time, it was loud, filled the entire plateau, a deep resonant vibration that pulsed through their bones and rattled their teeth. The deputies cried out, dropping their flashlights to clap their hands over their ears. Even the unflappable Agent Carver faltered, gripping his temple as if fighting off a migraine. And Hayes, clutching the notebook to his chest like a shield, whispered in a voice filled with both terror and awe. This is what he followed. This is what took him. The sound ceased as abruptly as it began. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic, heavy thudding of their own hearts. As the echoes died away, the men looked at each other, their faces a mask of shared horror. For the first time since arriving in Pinebrook, Agent Carver, the man who had radiated unshakable authority, looked truly uncertain. "We need to leave," Rourke said, his voice strained and tight. "Now." But Hayes just shook his head, his eyes locked on the scorched circle of stones. "If Harold heard that sound," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "he wouldn't have left. He would have stepped inside." The deputies exchanged fearful glances, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. If Harold stepped inside, where did he go? Night was falling fast now, long dark shadows stretching across the ridge like grasping fingers. With a shared reluctance, the men turned to begin their treacherous descent. But as they left the chilling plateau, Hayes slipped Harold's notebook back into his coat. His hand trembled as he did, because on the very last page they had somehow overlooked before was a single word, scribbled in uneven, desperate letters. Wait, thank you for watching. If you're as hooked on this mystery as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you miss what happens next. We'll see you in the next one. By the time Agent Carver, Agent Hayes, Sheriff Rourke, and the deputies made it back to Pinebrook. Darkness had completely swallowed the town. The streetlights flickered, their pale glow barely piercing the thick mist that clung to every corner, every alleyway. Normally, even at this hour, you'd hear the faint hum of a passing car, maybe distant chatter from a late-night walker. But tonight, Pinebrook was eerily still. The silence was heavy, oppressive. It felt as though the town had shrunk, tensing up, vulnerable, as if the forest itself was creeping in, reaching out with shadowy fingers to reclaim its edges. Inside the sheriff's office, the air was thick with unspoken questions. The men spread their findings across a large wooden table. The waterlogged shoe with the initials CK etched into the sole. Grim photographs of the scorched plateau and Harold's notebook. Agent Hayes clutched that notebook like it was a sacred text, like it held the single key to unlocking this entire nightmare. Agent Carver, usually the picture of calm authority, paced the floor. You could practically see the gears turning in his head, his mind racing a mile a minute. He finally stopped, his voice low and deliberate, cutting through the silence. "Whatever that was on Black Hollow Ridge," he said, making eye contact with every man in the room, "it doesn't leave this office. Not a word. Not a single word outside these walls. If panic gets a foothold, this town will turn on itself before we even have a clue what we are re-dealing with." But it was already too late. Panic wasn't just knocking on the door, it had already seeped through the cracks. By nightfall, small, anxious groups had gathered at Mel's Diner and the gas station. Their hushed whispers filled the air, weaving a tapestry of fear and speculation. Mothers held their children a little tighter, their eyes darting towards the darkened windows. Men argued in loud, frustrated voices, debating whether Sheriff Rourke was hiding something, whether the authorities were covering up the truth. The town's rumor mill, always active in a place like Pinebrook, was now churning at a furious pace. Old stories once dismissed as folklore were being dragged out of the shadows and examined under a new, terrifying light. Lights in the forest, strange guttural sounds echoing from the ridge, the disappearances, stretching back decades. These weren't just campfire tales anymore. They felt frighteningly, horribly real. Over at Mel's Diner, Margaret Kane sat in her usual booth, a cup of black coffee cradled in her hands. She was a fixture in this town, as much a part of the landscape as the pine trees themselves. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, following every movement, every nervous glance. When Sheriff Rourke walked past her table, his face a mask of exhaustion, she called out to him. Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that made him stop dead in his tracks. "You went up the ridge today," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Rourke froze, turning to face her. "And how would you know that, Margaret?" A faint knowing smile touched her lips. "The forest told me," she replied, her gaze unwavering, pinning him in place. "It's quiet tonight. It's too quiet. It's waiting for something." Her words, simple as they were, sent a shiver down the sheriff's spine, unsettling him more than he would ever admit. Back at the office, the fluorescent lights hummed over Agent Hayes. He was lost in Harold's notebook, tracing the intricate spirals, the strange constellations, and the overlapping circles with his fingertips. These weren't just random doodles from a man losing his mind. They were precise, meticulous. It was as if Harold was mapping something ancient, something far older and more deliberate than Pinebrook itself. Hayes started comparing the alignments in the notebook to local landmark streams, rocky outcrops, the very contours of Black Hollow Ridge. He whispered to the empty room. What if he wasn't just studying history? What if he was tracking something alive? Carver, overhearing him, shot him a sharp look. "Stop. We don't speculate, Hayes. Stick to the facts, the evidence." But Hayes couldn't stop. His mind was a whirlwind. His eyes fell on a page he'd somehow overlooked before, a page filled with smudged ink and frantic, desperate scrawls. The handwriting was almost illegible, but he could make out the words, "It watches. It waits. If I hear it, I must follow. Proof is the only way they'll believe me." Outside, Pinebrook held its breath. The streets were completely empty. Every window was shut tight, every curtain drawn. The only thing that moved was the wind, weaving through the skeletal branches of the tall pines that stood like silent sentinels at the edge of town, and then it returned. A hum, faint at first, but unmistakable. A low, deep vibration that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath their feet, like a massive engine rumbling to life. It echoed across the silent town, a sound that felt both physical and ancient. Deputy Frank Miller was on foot patrol at the northern edge of town when he heard it. He froze mid-step, his hand tightening around his flashlight. The vibration wasn't just a sound. He could feel it in his chest, rattling his teeth, making the hairs on his arms stand on end, and then a whisper. So quiet it was almost lost in the wind, but it was there. It was his own name, Miller. He spun around, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the oppressive darkness. But there was nothing. No one. Only the forest, a vast black wall of trees stretching into infinity, swallowing sound and light and secrets alike. In the early hours of the morning, the tension in the sheriff's office was a palpable thing. The FBI agents and the local deputies, bleary-eyed and on edge, gathered to decide their next move. Carver's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. We return to Black Hollow Ridge at first light. We go with a full team, fully equipped. And I'll say it again. Nothing about what we saw or what we suspect leaves this office. Is that understood? Hayes shook his head, his frustration finally boiling over. The town deserves to know something is wrong. Harold wasn't the first Carver, and if that hum means what I think it does, he won't be the last. Sheriff Rourke's jaw tightened, his face grim. I do think telling them will help. You've seen what happens when the whispers start. Fear is a poison agent. It'll do more damage than whatever is out there in those woods. The room fell silent. No one had an answer. The only sound was the low, persistent hum from the forest, a distant, vibrating heartbeat that seemed to mock their indecision. No one spoke again that night. Across Pinebrook, sleep offered no escape. In house after house, lights burned through drawn curtains. Anxious whispers echoed in hallways. Rifles, usually locked away, were propped against bedroom walls. The feeling of being watched, of a malevolent presence lingering just beyond the tree line, was so strong it was almost a physical touch. Even the old abandoned mill, which usually creaked and groaned through the night, seemed to be holding its breath, silent and waiting. And somewhere out there, deep within the shadows of Black Hollow Ridge, Harold Whitaker was still missing. Or perhaps he was no longer just missing. Perhaps he had been found, absorbed into something older, deeper, and far more terrifying than the town of Pinebrook could ever possibly comprehend. This story is just beginning to unfold, and the mystery of Black Hollow Ridge is far from over. What do you think is making that sound? What was Harold trying to prove? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you're as captivated by this as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching, and stay safe. As the sun pierced the morning mist over Pinebrook, Agent Carver, Agent Hayes, and Sheriff Rourke's team headed back to Black Hollow Ridge. The town was gripped by a chilling silence. The eerie hum and whispers from the night before had left everyone on edge. Children clung to their parents and people moved in nervous pairs, their eyes darting towards the forest, half expecting something to step out from the trees. The woods themselves felt different today, almost sentient. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed amplified, as if the forest was watching their every move. Their destination was the plateau where Harold had vanished, the place marked by those strange scorch marks and stone spirals. Hayes's voice was tight with tension. This is it. He followed the sound right here. This is where he disappeared. Carver's eyes scanned the area. Stay focused. Eyes open. Psst. We stick together. The climb was a struggle against nature itself. Mossy rocks, fallen logs, and thick undergrowth blocked their path at every turn. As they finally reached the plateau, a thin, unnatural fog swirled around the circle of stones, like restless spirits. In the morning light, the scorch marks on the ground were even more stark, black against the pale mist. Hayes knelt down, his fingers tracing a faint outline in the dirt inside the circle. Footprints, small, delicate, and human. But they ended abruptly. Just stopped. No sign of a struggle, no tracks leading away. Harold was here, Hayes said, his voice trembling, and then it started. The low hum returned, stronger this time, vibrating through the very ground beneath their feet. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. It felt communicative, almost intentional. The deputies looked at each other, their faces pale. None of them had ever experienced anything like this. The hum pulsed like a giant unseen heart. "Step carefully," Carver commanded, moving toward the center of the stone circle. "We need to map this precisely. Document everything." Hayes placed Harold's notebook on a flat stone. The moment he did, a cold breeze whipped around them, and the fog thickened instantly, swallowing them in a dense, white shroud. Shadows danced in the mist, twisting into shapes that defied logic. Then, a whisper cut through the air, so faint, it was almost lost in the wind, yet chillingly clear. "Follow." Every man there froze. A shiver ran down my spine, and I know it did for the others too. "Did you hear that?" Rourke breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. Hayes nodded, his voice barely audible. Yes, that's what he heard. That's what led him here. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. The wind swirled, carrying that eerie resonance through the plateau. We could see faint glows appearing along the carved spirals on the stones, pulsing with a strange energy. Hayes, driven by a need to understand, reached out and touched one of the stones. The instant his fingers made contact, the fog seemed to lurch forward, wrapping the group in a suffocating embrace. "Don't touch anything else," Carver yelled, stepping back sharply. But it was too late. The forest had already decided what would happen next. From the swirling mist, something began to form. Shadows stretched and coalesced, taking on a vague, human-like shape. It wasn't solid, flickering in and out of existence, just beyond the reach of the light. And then, a voice echoed through the air, a voice that sounded chillingly like Harold's, but distorted, unnatural. "Don't come." Closer. The shape wavered, then dissolved back into the mist. Just as suddenly, the hum stopped. The silence that followed was heavier, more suffocating than the sound had been. We stood frozen, hearts pounding, our minds trying to process what we had just witnessed. Carver finally broke the stillness. "We document everything. Photographs, notes. Then we leave." Hayes bent over Harold's notebook one last time. He hadn't noticed it before, but on the final page, new words had appeared, scrawled in a hurried, desperate hand. It read, "It waits. It calls. The forest chooses. We don't follow alone." We descended the ridge in silence. The hum was gone, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest, but the weight of the experience was crushing. Back in Pinebrook, the residents watched the ridge, a silent understanding passing between them. They sensed, as we did, that the forest had only shown us a fraction of its power. Harold Whitaker was gone. All that remained were the scorched stones, the cryptic spirals, and his notebook, a chilling testament to a mystery we would never solve. The forest was patient. It was waiting. Life in Pinebrook returned to a tense, fragile routine. No one spoke of what happened on the ridge, but they didn't have to. The memory of the hum, the whispers, and the shadowy figure would linger forever. And somewhere, deep within those ancient woods, Harold Whitaker's fate remains a dark secret. A permanent reminder that some disappearances are not meant to be understood. Thanks for joining us on this unsettling journey into the heart of Pinebrook's mystery. If stories like this capture your imagination, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explorations into the unknown. Stay safe and stay curious.